One of the things that makes Magic a unique game is its color pie. The idea that each color is a ideological faction and their culture defines the flavor and gameplay of its cards. And one of the things in Commander across the entire color pie has been adding more card draw. Of course, blue can draw cards as it wants, and white was the laughingstock of not being able to draw cards, and red was impulsing. But how has Commander card draw evolved in 2024? In this video, I want to show off 3 cards from each color that show the current state of card draw in Commander. First, in the color pie, we have white. White primarily drew cards in 2024 by giving our opponents cards whenever our opponents did something specific, and whenever we had creatures of a certain power. First, it drew cards with Tempt with Bunnies. With a Tempting Offer, draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. Then each opponent may draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. For each opponent who does, you draw a card and you create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. White has over the years done this I draw cards, you draw cards, and this like negotiating peacekeeper style of letting you draw more cards because white just doesn't draw cards without something happening typically. And this is a way that all of your opponents can draw cards and give you more cards, and so it's more even to white's ability to draw cards in the color pie. Next, it drew cards with Trouble in Pairs. If an opponent begins an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws the second card each turn, or casts a second spell each turn, you draw a card. White draws cards whenever your opponents do things. This is more of like a control-y stacks type of card that rewards you whenever your opponents do things and keeps your tempo in the game and keeps your hand full in control decks. But white drew cards this year whenever your opponents did things. And lastly, white drew cards whenever your creatures hit a certain status, kind of like a if this is true, then draw a card, through a Fallout card that says whenever a creature you control attacks, if it enlisted a creature this combat, the creature that attacks gains double strike until end of turn. If that creature's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. Again, combat-based drawing of cards, and if your creatures hit a certain criteria, you could draw a card. And those are 3 ways that white primarily drew cards in 2024. The next color on our list is blue. Blue primarily drew cards just by drawing cards. It drew cards whenever we do certain things and whenever our opponents do certain things. To show off blue just drawing cards naturally, I have Lock and Load from Outlaw the Thunder Junction Commander. It's a sorcery that says draw a card, then draw a card for each other instant sorcery you've cast this turn, and it has Plot. Blue just draws cards naturally with divination type effects. Blue also drew cards this year whenever we did things. Again, another if-then. If we attacked with 2 or more creatures, we put a puzzle counter on it and draw a card. And it has a win condition attached to having drawn a ton of cards. To show off our opponents doing things and it rewarding us as cards, I have Polywog Prodigy. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than its power, draw a card. Of course, this is a Legacy All-Star, but it still was printed in a Commander set. And it rewards us whenever our opponents cast cheaper spells than its power. And it has that evolve mechanic to make sure it's always increasing, so you have more chances to draw cards. Black drew cards primarily in 2024 Commander products through whenever we hit a certain criteria, we would lose life and draw cards, or by letting us cast things from the top of our library by paying costs. There's typically costs like life or sacrificing whenever black draws cards in the color philosophy. And my first example of that is Demonic Covenant. It's an enchantment demon. Whenever 1 or more demons you control attack a player, you draw a card and lose a life. It also has at the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 demon creature token with flying, then mill 2 cards. If 2 cards that share all their card types are milled this way, sacrifice it. Black has this conditional card draw that hurts us, and another example of that is Discreet Retreat. Whenever you cast your first outlaw spell each turn, you draw a card and lose a life. It enchants a land and gives you the ability to add more mana to cast your outlaw spells or activate ability of outlaw sources, and then leans into rewarding you with drawing a card but punishing you by taking a life. Black also had access at the top of its library, which is close to drawing cards, but it just allows you to have 1 more card on your hand essentially because your top of your deck is now in your hand. You may look at the top card of your library anytime, and Into the Pet has you may cast spells from the top of your library by sacrificing a non-land permanent in addition to paying another cost. Doesn't make you lose life, it makes you lose things that you already have in play and leans into you losing something to gain something. You're doing something evil to benefit you to win the game. Next up on the color pie is red, and red primarily drew cards this year by wheeling, by exiling cards on top of their library and letting you cast them, or by whenever your opponents make a choice, you get to draw cards. My first example is Pyretic Charge. Discard your hand and draw 4 cards. For each card discarded this way, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So for 5 mana, it can refill your hand if your hand's empty, or you can gain some value off of discarding 2 cards or 4 cards and drawing 4 fresh ones. It rewards you by playing out the middle of the game a little more efficient and getting your creatures across the finish line. Wild Wasteland. Skip your draw step. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of the library. You may play those cards this turn. This is the equivalent of impulsy draws that Red has access to, and this was one version of that we got out of the Fallout Commander sets of 2024. Skipping your draw step is a big sacrifice, but you're getting twice as much access to cards than if you hadn't played this card. So if your deck has no other way to draw cards, this could just give you more gas. Mob Verdict has Secret Council. Each player secretly votes for another player. Then those votes are revealed. For each vote an opponent received, it deals 2 damage to that player and each creature that player controls. For each vote you received, you draw a card. So your opponents can choose to either have their opponent's stuff get destroyed or just let you draw a bunch of cards. And this is that conditional. Red sometimes gets to draw cards. Different than white, because white says if this happens, then do this. But red gets this like random type effect, that impulsive feeling. This has that impulsive feeling of the mob, making their choice. And I think it really leans into what red feels when it draws cards. Green in 2024 primarily drew cards by whenever something happens, you get to draw a card, or it rewards you by having the beefiest creature, or everyone gets to draw a card. One example is Thickest in the Thicket. When it enters, put X ++ encounters on target creature or access that creature's power. And it has, at the beginning of your end step, draw 2 cards if you control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power. Green rewards you for having big, beefy creatures, and these little woodland creatures are working out and getting their buff on. Next up, we have Well Rested. It's an enchantment. Whenever this creature becomes untapped, put 2 +1 counters on it, you gain 2 life and you draw a card. This card's actually really good because it essentially says you draw an extra card every turn. But if your commander becomes untapped or tapped for any reason, you get more value off of it. But green gets to draw cards here whenever something happens. Green also gets to draw cards by letting everyone draw cards. Similar to white, that lets your opponents draw cards and you get to draw cards. It's just let everyone draw a card. This researcher has Parlay. Whenever it attacks, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, you investigate. Then each player draws a card. At the beginning of your end step, you may untap all lands you control. If you do, you can cast spells until your next turn. This reveals cards and lets everyone draw cards. This is a way that green gets to draw more cards, similar to how white draws cards. What do you think about the differences in how each color tackles getting to draw cards or giving you access to more cards? And what colors you think should have more abilities to impulse or draw or let everyone draw? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.